The months following are instructive. Smalls pilots multiple successful missions through southern waters. Every navigation decision proves sound. Every route selection is efficient. The Navy's mission success rate in his operational area increases by 40%. This is documented, measured, undeniable. Yet something peculiar happens in the official record. Reports credit improved intelligence, better weather analysis, enhanced coordination, everything except Smalls himself. The missions succeed. The system acknowledges success. But the architecture of credit flows around Smalls rather than toward him. Wilson remains in command, his authority intact, his rank unchanged. He no longer selects routes, but he still issues orders, still writes reports, still represents the mission in official capacity. And in those reports, navigation decisions appear passive. Routes are described as selected rather than navigated. Success is attributed to planning rather than execution. The language is careful, technically accurate, but it erases the human element. It transforms Smalls' expertise into abstract process. He becomes invisible again, but through documentation rather than dismissal. Other commanders notice the pattern. Some request Smalls for their missions. Others resist. The resistance is never explicit, never documented. It appears as scheduling conflicts, assignment complications, administrative delays. But the pattern is clear. Certain commanders will not work with a black pilot regardless of his record. The system accommodates this. It does not force the issue. It finds workarounds. Smalls gets assigned to commanders who request him or who have no choice. Everyone else continues as before. The Navy needs Smalls' competence, but it will not force white officers to acknowledge that need publicly. In April of 1864, Smalls receives promotion, not to officer. That would require congressional approval, Senate confirmation, levels of recognition the system is not ready to provide. Instead, he is designated as official pilot with enhanced authority. The promotion comes with increased pay, expanded responsibility, and absolutely no change in social standing. He still cannot eat in the officer's mess, still cannot quarter in officer housing, still must use separate facilities. The Navy needs his knowledge. It will compensate his labor, but it will not integrate his person. Smalls understands this completely. He accepts the promotion without illusion. This is not progress. This is utility. The Navy has calculated his value and adjusted compensation accordingly. Nothing more. He continues his work. Pilots ships, saves lives, prevents failures, and watches the system carefully document everything except the fundamental truth that they needed him more than he needed their validation. In June, Smalls encounters Wilson again. A chance meeting in a Charleston supply depot. Wilson is requisitioning equipment. Smalls is reviewing charts. They see each other across the warehouse floor. Neither moves. The silence stretches. Other sailors sense the tension. They find reasons to be elsewhere. Finally, Wilson approaches. His stride is measured, controlled. He stops 3 feet from Smalls, close enough for conversation, far enough to maintain distance. Wilson speaks first. "I hear your missions continue successfully." His tone is neutral, empty of inflection. Smalls nods. "Yes, sir." Wilson looks at the charts spread on the table between them. He does not touch them. He asks, "How do you do it?" Smalls considers the question. The real question underneath. Wilson is asking how Smalls knew, how he developed knowledge that Wilson, with all his training, all his credentials, all his inherited authority, does not possess. Smalls could explain about years of observation, about necessity forcing attention to detail, about survival requiring precision. But he knows Wilson is not really asking for information. He is asking for absolution. Smalls says, "I pay attention, sir." Wilson's jaw tightens. That is not an answer. Smalls meets his eyes. "With respect, sir, it is the only answer. You learn by watching, by remembering, by understanding that one mistake can cost everything." Wilson stares at him. The moment extends. Then Wilson says, "You made me look incompetent." His voice is low, not angry, Something closer to grief. Smalls responds carefully. No, sir. You made yourself look incompetent. I just provided an alternative. Wilson flinches. The words land. But he does not argue. He cannot. The record is clear. 3 failures, 1 success. Different routes. Same commander, same pilot. The math speaks. Wilson straightens. His face hardens back into professional neutrality. He says you are still arrogant. Smalls replies, I am still correct. The distinction matters. Wilson turns and walks away. They will not speak again. This is the closest thing to acknowledgement Smalls will ever receive from him. Not apology, not respect, just recognition that he was wrong. That being wrong has consequences. That those consequences do not disappear just because the system protects you from official accountability. By summer of 1864, Smalls has become indispensable. The Navy assigns him to increasingly complex missions, evacuations under fire, supply runs through contested waters, intelligence gathering in hostile territory. Each mission succeeds, each success is documented, and each documentation carefully avoids making Smalls the central figure. Reports describe successful operations. They list objectives achieved, casualties avoided, intelligence secured. But Smalls appears as pilot or as assigned personnel, never as the architect of success, never as the reason missions work. Admiral Dahlgren understands what is happening. He is not blind to the politics, but he is also pragmatic. He needs Smalls. He needs the mission success rate Smalls provides, and he knows that championing Smalls too loudly will create resistance, will make other commanders defensive, will turn competence into controversy. So the Admiral uses Smalls quietly, assigns him strategically, protects him bureaucratically, and never acknowledges publicly what everyone knows privately, that Smalls is one of the most skilled naval pilots in the Union fleet. In August, another incident crystallizes the dynamic. A Union transport ship runs aground in shallow water near Fort Sumter. Confederate artillery has range. The crew is trapped. Daylight evacuation is suicide. Night evacuation is navigationally impossible. The channel is too complex, too many obstacles. No one wants to attempt it. The mission is offered to several experienced pilots. All decline. The risk is too high. The navigation too difficult. The likelihood of success too low. Then someone suggests Smalls. The suggestion comes from a junior officer who served with Smalls previously. He has seen Smalls navigate impossible situations. He believes Smalls can do this. Senior officers hesitate. This is not a supply run. This is a rescue under enemy fire in complete darkness through waters that experienced white pilots have refused. If Smalls fails, if men die, the optics are devastating. A black pilot given a mission, white pilots refused. The racial implications are impossible to ignore. But if they do not send someone, the crew dies anyway. Confederate artillery will destroy the transport by morning. The calculation is brutal. Send Smalls and risk failure with racial complications, or send no one and accept certain casualties. Admiral Dahlgren makes the decision. He calls Smalls to his office, explains the situation, does not order him, asks him, "Can you navigate that channel at night?" Smalls asks about tide schedules, moon phase, wind conditions. The Admiral provides data. Smalls studies it in silence. Then he asks for 1 hour to review charts and prepare. The Admiral grants it. Smalls leaves. He spreads charts in his quarters. He traces the channel from memory, cross-references with tidal data, calculates approach angles. This is not bravery. This is mathematics, and the mathematics say it is possible. Barely, but possible. Smalls returns to the Admiral, says he can do it, but he needs complete authority during the operation. No interference, no second guessing. The Admiral agrees. Smalls departs at 2200 hours, 10 at night. New moon, minimal light. He navigates by memory and sound, by the feel of current against the hull, by the rhythm of water. He brings no lights, moves slowly, calls adjustments in whispers. The crew trusts him completely. They have no choice. They are navigating blind through enemy territory. One error grounds them. One noise draws artillery. They are entirely dependent on Small's knowledge, his precision, his memory. The rescue takes 4 hours. Smalls navigates to the grounded transport. Crew transfers in darkness. Complete silence. Confederate sentries patrol nearby. One shout would end them. Smalls holds position while men board. Then he navigates out. Same impossible channel. Same darkness, same precision. They clear Confederate range by 0300 hours. 3 in the morning. Every crew member survives. 0 casualties. Mission success. Complete. Impossible. Documented. The crew wants to celebrate Smalls. Wants to make him a hero. The Admiral stops this. Quietly. He knows that making Smalls too visible will create problems. Will make other officers resentful. Will turn success into political controversy. So he files a quiet report. Mission accomplished, crew rescued, minimal details. Small's name appears in the list of personnel, not as mission commander, not as lead pilot, just as assigned pilot. The rescue becomes another entry in the record, another successful operation, anonymous in its achievement. Smalls understands this too. He does not protest, does not demand recognition. He knows the game, knows the system, knows that visibility is dangerous for someone in his position. Better to be indispensable and invisible than celebrated and vulnerable. So he accepts the quiet acknowledgement, the private gratitude from rescued crew members, the unspoken respect from officers who understand what he accomplished. And he continues working, piloting, navigating. Saving lives, the system will credit to operational planning rather than individual skill. By late 1864, the pattern is established. Smalls pilots the most difficult missions, succeeds consistently, receives minimal public recognition. The Navy depends on him completely, acknowledges this dependency never. Other black sailors notice. They see what Smalls represents, competence that cannot be denied but will not be celebrated, achievement that is essential but must remain invisible. They understand the message. You can be indispensable. You can be irreplaceable, but you will never be equal. The system will use you, will need you, will compensate you, but will never fully acknowledge you. In December, Smalls is assigned to pilot the USS Keokuk again. Different mission, same ship, and yes, Commander Wilson is still in overall command. The assignment is deliberate. Someone in command structure has a sense of irony. Or perhaps it is a test. Can these two men work together after what happened? Can Wilson accept Smalls' authority in navigation while maintaining overall command? Can Smalls operate under Wilson without resentment? The mission will answer these questions. They meet in the briefing room. Other officers present. Maps spread, objectives outlined. Wilson presents the mission. His voice is professional, controlled. When he reaches the navigation portion, he pauses. Then he says, Pilot Smalls will select the optimal route based on his expertise in these waters. The room goes silent. This is public deference. Wilson is acknowledging Smalls' superior knowledge in front of other officers. It costs him. Everyone can see it. But he does it anyway. Because the alternative is mission failure. And whatever else Wilson is, he is still a naval officer. Mission success matters more than personal pride. Eventually, Smalls presents his route selection. Wilson listens, asks clarifying questions, accepts the plan. The briefing ends. Officers file out. Wilson and Smalls remain. Wilson speaks first. I will not apologize for what I said before. Smalls nods. I do not expect you to. Wilson continues. But I will not repeat those mistakes. Smalls says that is sufficient, and it is. Not forgiveness. Not friendship, just professional acknowledgement. Two men who must work together, who have learned painful lessons about assumptions and authority, who will never like each other but can respect competence. The mission proceeds smoothly. Smalls' route is efficient. Wilson's command is sound. They function as a unit. When they return, the after-action report credits both men appropriately. Wilson for overall command. Smalls for navigation expertise. It is honest documentation, rare in its even-handedness, and it sets a precedent. Other commanders begin to acknowledge their pilots more explicitly, not out of enlightenment, out of pragmatism. If Wilson can defer to Smalls and still maintain command authority, others can too. The system shifts, incrementally, barely, but it shifts. War ends in April of 1865. Lee surrenders at Appomattox. Confederate resistance collapses. The Union claims victory. Men celebrate. But for Smalls, the victory is complicated. The war freed him, gave him opportunity, allowed him to demonstrate competence. But peace brings new questions. What happens to black sailors in a peacetime navy? What happens to the competence the war forced the system to acknowledge? Will that acknowledgement survive once necessity fades? Smalls watches, waits, and prepares for the next dismissal. It comes faster than expected. Within months, the Navy begins demobilizing, reducing force size, releasing personnel, and the releases follow predictable patterns. Black sailors go first, regardless of record, regardless of skill, regardless of war service. The justification is administrative. Reduction in force requires difficult choices. Seniority matters. Peacetime needs differ from wartime needs. The language is careful, never explicitly racial. But the outcome is clear. Smalls watches men who served with distinction, dismissed while less competent white sailors retain positions. The system returns to its default settings. War temporarily disrupted hierarchy. Peace restores it. Smalls receives his own notification in July of 1865. Honorable discharge, commendation for service, gratitude for contribution, and dismissal. The letter is polite, professional. It thanks him for his exceptional navigation skills during the war. It acknowledges his role in multiple successful operations. It wishes him well in future endeavors. It does everything except offer him continued employment. The message is clear. Your competence was useful during crisis. Crisis is over. We no longer need to accommodate you. Smalls reads the letter twice. He feels nothing. No surprise, no anger, no disappointment. He knew this was coming. The system showed him who it was from the beginning. War changed nothing fundamental. It just created temporary conditions where his skill became more valuable than his race. Now conditions have changed again. The calculation has reversed, and the system returns to what it always was, an architecture designed to exclude him. He does not protest, does not appeal, does not write letters requesting reconsideration. He understands that competence does not overcome systemic design. You can be the best. You can be indispensable. You can save lives and win missions and prove yourself beyond any doubt. And the system will still choose men like Wilson over men like you. Because the system was built that way. Because authority is inherited, not earned. Because some people are assumed competent until proven otherwise, while others must prove themselves infinitely and still be dismissed. Smalls leaves the Navy in August of 1865. He returns to South Carolina. But he does not disappear, does not become invisible. He carries with him something the Navy could not take away. Knowledge, experience, proof that he can navigate systems designed to exclude him. Proof that competence exists outside official recognition. Proof that being dismissed by power does not mean being defeated by it. He enters politics, runs for office, wins, becomes a state representative, then state senator, then United States congressman. He serves 5 terms in the House of Representatives. He writes legislation, shapes policy, influences outcomes, and he does this while former Confederate officers sit in the same chamber. While men who fought to keep him enslaved now debate law with him as an equal. Officially equal anyway. The social hierarchies remain. The assumptions persist. But the system must accommodate him now, must acknowledge his presence, must accept his authority, even as it resents his existence. Throughout his political career, Smalls faces the same pattern he faced in the Navy. Dismissal, underestimation, Assumption of incompetence. White politicians assume he is a figurehead, assume he does not understand complex policy, assume someone else writes his speeches, does his research, makes his decisions. They are wrong. Every time. Smalls understands policy deeply, writes his own legislation, outmaneuvers opponents who underestimate him. But the assumptions never stop. Because the assumptions are not about him. They are about the system's need to believe in its own hierarchy. In 1877, Smalls faces a challenge that mirrors his naval experience exactly. A political opponent accuses him of corruption. The charges are fabricated. The evidence is falsified. But the accusation itself serves a purpose. It forces Smalls to defend himself, to prove his innocence, to demonstrate that he earned his position legitimately. The burden of proof reverses. Normally, accusers must prove guilt. But when the accused is black and the position is power, the accused must prove worthiness, must prove they belong, must prove the system did not make a mistake by including them. Smalls fights the charges, methodically, carefully. He documents his finances, provides evidence of legitimate income, demonstrates that every decision he made was legal and proper. He does not just prove innocence, he proves meticulous correctness. Because innocence is not enough. He must be beyond reproach, must exceed the standard applied to white politicians, must be twice as clean to be considered half as trustworthy. He knows this, has always known this, and he meets the standard. Again. The charges are dismissed. Smalls is exonerated, but the accusation itself served its purpose. It reminded him that his position is conditional, that he exists in political space on sufferance, that the system can challenge his legitimacy at any moment for any reason. That power will always question whether he belongs, will always look for reasons to dismiss him, will always assume he is the wrong man for the position, just as Wilson did, just as the Navy did, just as American power always has. Smalls serves until 1887, 22 years in politics. Longer than most white politicians, more successful than many. He writes significant legislation, shapes education policy, advocates for civil rights, influences national debate. And when he finally leaves office, the system breathes easier, not because he failed, because he succeeded. And his success was uncomfortable. It proved things the system preferred to deny. That competence exists in people the system claims are incompetent. That authority can be earned by those the system believes should inherit nothing. That being dismissed by power does not determine capability, only opportunity. Smalls lives until 1915. 76 years old. He watches Reconstruction end, watches Jim Crow rise, watches the gains of the war years systematically dismantled, watches black political power crushed by violence and law, watches the system restore itself to hierarchies he spent decades challenging, and he understands that his life was not about changing the system. It was about proving the system wrong, about demonstrating that its assumptions were false, its hierarchies arbitrary, its authority unearned. When he dies, newspapers write obituaries. They mention the planter, the dramatic escape, the heroic theft of a Confederate ship. That story is safe. It fits narratives about individual courage, about war drama, about exceptional circumstances. What the obituaries mostly omit is everything after. The years of competence, the navigation expertise, the political career, the sustained challenge to power. Because that story is uncomfortable. It suggests that Smalls was not an exception, that his competence was not unique, that the system's assumptions about who deserves power are built on foundation of convenience rather than truth. Commander Wilson dies in 1893, 22 years before Smalls. His obituary is longer, more detailed. It lists his naval service, his commands, his post-war career. It describes him as a dedicated officer who served with distinction. It does not mention the failed missions, the dismissed pilot, the routes that cost time and almost cost lives, because Wilson was protected in life and remains protected in death. The system wrote his story the way it needed to be written. As a competent officer, A reliable commander, a man who earned his authority, and if the record shows otherwise, well, the record can be selectively read. But documents exist, navigation logs, after-action reports, mission records. They sit in archives, mostly unread, occasionally examined by historians who notice patterns. 3 failed missions with 1 commander, 1 successful mission with different navigation. The same waters, the same objectives, different outcomes. The documents do not explain why this happened, they just record that it did. And for anyone willing to read carefully, the story is there. The story of power choosing the wrong man, of a system protecting that choice, of competence being dismissed and then proven undeniable, of a black pilot navigating around institutional arrogance and succeeding where white authority failed. This story is not exceptional, it is template. Throughout American history, the pattern repeats. Power dismisses competence, authority assumes superiority, the system protects its hierarchies, and people like Smalls navigate around the obstacles, prove themselves despite the dismissal, succeed without the validation, and watch the system take credit for their success while denying their existence. This is not tragedy. This is architecture, the system working exactly as designed, to protect some, to dismiss others, to ensure that authority flows to those born expecting it, rather than those who earn it. What makes Smalls different is documentation. Most dismissed competence leaves no trace. Most people who are underestimated and prove themselves superior do so invisibly. Their victories go unrecorded. Their navigation expertise becomes institutional memory without attribution. They save missions and careers and lives and disappear into operational footnotes. But Smalls was visible enough, important enough, controversial enough, that his competence could not be completely erased, could not be entirely absorbed into system credit, had to be acknowledged, however minimally, however reluctantly. And that acknowledgement creates a crack. Small, almost invisible, but permanent. Because once the system admits that it dismissed someone who was correct, it admits that its dismissals might be wrong, that its assumptions might be false, that its hierarchies might be arbitrary. The system cannot afford this admission, so it minimizes, contextualizes, frames Smalls as exception rather than example, as unique talent rather than representative competence, as historical curiosity rather than systemic indictment. But the crack remains, and documents remain, and anyone willing to read can see what happened, can see that power chose the wrong man, that the system protected that choice, and that consequences eventually arrived, regardless of protection. Robert Smalls stands as evidence that dismissal by authority is not verdict on capability, that being underestimated says more about the estimator than the estimated, that systems built to exclude specific people will protect incompetent insiders over competent outsiders, will choose familiar failure over unfamiliar success, will dismiss expertise when it arrives in unexpected form, and that this dismissal costs missions, costs lives, costs progress, costs the system itself, though the system rarely acknowledges the price. The question is not whether men like Wilson will dismiss men like Smalls. That is guaranteed. The architecture ensures it. The question is what happens after dismissal, whether the dismissed person has opportunity to demonstrate what power refused to see, whether evidence can overcome assumption, whether competence can survive institutional resistance. Sometimes it can. Sometimes the missions fail badly enough that even protected commanders face consequences. Sometimes the need becomes desperate enough that the system temporarily suspends its hierarchies. Sometimes documentation exists that cannot be erased. Sometimes the crack widens, but mostly it does not. Mostly the system protects itself successfully. Mostly Wilson types retain authority despite failure. Mostly Smalls types remain invisible despite success. Mostly the architecture functions as designed, to preserve power for those born expecting it, to dismiss competence from those presumed incapable, to ensure that the wrong men keep their positions and the right men are sent away. This is not accident. This is purpose. The system is working. It is working exactly as intended. And that is the most uncomfortable truth of all.